Welcome to the Do You Know Him podcast. My name is Lowell King. I'll be your host today. Today's podcast I've decided to entitle Do You Have What It Takes? It's a funny thing. Like many Christians or people that become Christians, or maybe people who are facing some trials in life, they haven't made a decision about becoming a Christian. We all go through the same human responses to things that come up in our life. And I guess the question is, how are we going to respond? We talked earlier on another podcast about people that are in the military who can go through all this training and they can have all this heart knowledge. They can have all, or I should say, head knowledge. They have all of this ability uh, to do the things that they're trained to do physically. They can shoot a gun and they can run a course and so on and so forth. The question is, what's going to happen when they actually get into a situation where someone's shooting back at them? And that's kind of what this podcast is about today, because I found myself in a situation that I really didn't want to be a part of, but at the same time, I really sensed that God was calling me to do something and not just sit there. So this particular day, what occurred, I went through the normal routines of my life, but I had been involved on the sidelines of an issue that is very divisive in this country. People don't even want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about what side of the issue they're on. I happen to be pro-life, and I happen to be a person who has had a personal experience in my life where abortion touched my life. I was unable to do anything because I found out very quickly uh, in the world that we live in today that men do not have any right when it comes to abortion. It's they're just left out of the equation. This is not a story about the abortion issue, whether or not you belong on one side or the other. I'm not trying to promote the pro-life side of it or pro-choice. I'm simply telling you a story of what happened to me in a situation that I found myself in that I did not want to be in, and yet I had felt like God was calling me, so that I'm going to go on with the story, and I hope that you can appreciate it. Uh, so what happened was my wife and I had attended an event. In fact, I think our children both went with us as well. That was at a local church, and it had to do with a organization called Operation Rescue. And again, a very divisive issue because Operation Rescue is a organization that believed that it was okay for them to physically block the doors of an abortion clinic and take whatever abuse they had to take, including going to jail, to prevent the abortion from taking the life of an unborn child. And so I went there not knowing anything about this organization. It was a relatively new organization, and at this point in time. And so they were out explaining to people what they were doing. They were very clear about the fact that they would not uh, physically cause anyone any harm, that their whole mission was simply to block the door with bodies to prevent the abortion clinic from opening that day to end the life of an unborn child. So we went through the whole routine that night. We singing and praising God and praying, so whatever. And we got to the point where the speakers came up, and at the end of the evening, the speakers said, "Well, we would like to know if God's put it on your heart to put your body between uh, the abortion clinic doors and the people that are coming to have an abortion. Are you willing to block the doors? Are you willing to take whatever abuse is necessary? Are you willing to even go to jail if necessary to prevent uh, the life of this unborn child from being taken? So if you are, please stand up." And I remember that day, I just wanted to grab the seat because I did not want to get up. Number one, I wasn't even feeling at that point that I was being moved to get up. But I did feel a little embarrassed that there were other people that were standing up and that I was still sitting down. But at the same time, I just didn't feel like it was something that I was being called to do. So I sat there, And of course, we prayed for the people that were going to be arrested the next day. And the gentleman who was speaking said, if you have any interest in doing this, you should be here tomorrow morning at 4:30 in the morning. We will be boarding a bus, and we will be going to whatever clinic that we're intending to go to. We will not reveal that information to anyone until the morning of the event. But if you'd like to participate, please be here at 4:30. So we left, and we were driving home, and I remember I was probably about halfway to my house, and all of a sudden it was just like the Holy Spirit just grabbed a hold of me and said, you know, you need to do something. Don't just sit there. Don't be a coward. Get up and do something regardless. Is this little child who's going to be aborted, is their life worth putting your life in a little bit of danger to protect them? And I thought, wow, I don't know what to say about this. So I all of a sudden I just turned to my wife and I said, you know what? I said, I have to go there tomorrow morning. I have to be a part of this. I have to do something. And she said, are you sure? Don't you realize you could be arrested? And I said, yeah. I said, at this point, I really do believe that this is something that I need to do. So I got up and then got there, and I got there at 4:30. And when I got there, I thought, what is going on here? There was probably only a half a dozen people that had slept at the church that night, and I was the first one that was there other than those 6 people. And I thought, well, I remember seeing a lot of people stand up last night. Did they decide to not come? Were they afraid of being arrested? Maybe they had some second thoughts or whatever. And I'm kind of sitting there and I'm looking around. I don't know anyone, and I'm thinking, well, what in the world am I doing here? And but for whatever reason, I decided to stay. And so after about, I don't know, probably an hour, I think 5:30 in the morning, maybe 6, I don't remember exactly. By that time, people were kind of like coming in, and slowly but surely there was a fairly good-sized group of people, enough to fill the bus. And I think there was 2 buses, come to think of it. And so they loaded us up on the bus, and off we went. No one knowing exactly where we were going to go. I didn't even know where the abortion clinics were located. But, as the bus meandered down the highway, I remember looking around and thinking, I don't know a single soul in this group. I did not know one person. And I talked a little bit to somebody I was sitting next to. I think we were all a little apprehensive about what we could expect when we got there. But needless to say, we were on their bus, and I was committed to whatever was going to happen. I was going to let it happen that day, and I was going to do my best to prevent another abortion from being committed that day. So it turns out that we wound up in San Francisco. And I remember we got off the bus and we literally ran to get to the door of the abortion clinic. And the reason we did that, I guess, is because there were people from the opposing side who were trying to get to the door before us. They were following us in cars, and their purpose was to try to beat us there and to block the clinic doors in a way that they could still allow people to get in. But in this particular case, we were successful, not only blocking the front entrance, but also there was a side entrance. So there's no way into the building except, through the 2 entrances we had blocked. And there was quite a few people there. I mean, I'm thinking there must have been some other cars or something that came, because there was probably a good 150 of us that were there at the clinic that morning. And I remember that I was kind of like looking around, where am I going to be in this group? And so what I decided to do was to try to get into the middle of the group, thinking that at least if I'm in the middle of the group, I will be, somewhat protected by the people around me on the front. And what's the chance maybe by the time they get down to arresting people, that I'll be in the middle and I'll be far enough away where they decide to just tell us to go home or whatever. I had all these weird thoughts going through my mind. So the morning kind of wore on, and it got to be 9 and then 10 o'clock, and uh, the clinic, meantime, the police had already come and they were arresting people. And they, for whatever reason, they decided to start arresting on the side of the house, of the building where we were in the front. And I think because there were less people over there, they thought if they could get enough arrested on the side, they could open the clinic from the side door. And the people that were leading the organization there, as 10 or 12 people were arrested, 10 or 12 of our group from the front would go over and fill in where the other people were arrested. And so we're pretty successful in keeping the clinic closed. In fact, I'm thinking it was probably about 10 o'clock. I remember that there was this guy that was walking around the perimeter of the group I was in. And like I say, I was right in the middle. And his name was Steve. I don't remember his last name right now, but his name was Steve. A young college-looking kid, real nice man. I found out later on, really good guy. But at that time, I didn't know who he was. And all of a sudden, he pointed his finger at me. Well, one of the things that were talked about the night before were moles and people that would infiltrate this organization to try to find out what was going on and then communicate to the other side what was going on. Typical of a lot of different organizations, you hear that word mole. Someone that sneaked in to try to find out what was going on and then be able to communicate that information back over to somebody else. And so he pointed his finger at me, and I'm in a group of almost 100 people, but for some reason I knew he was pointing at me. But I'm kind of like looking around like he must be pointing at somebody else, but in fact I knew he was talking to me. He says, "No, you with the baseball hat or whatever I had on, I don't remember." And he said, come here." And so I thought, well, does he think I'm a mole or what's going on here? So he introduced himself to me and he said, "Look," he says, "I want you to do something over here." So he says, "Follow me." So I went over to the far left side of where the group was kind of huddled around the front door. And he said, "There is an area here that somebody could come down the side." And he says, "I want you to stand here and I want you to make sure that nobody gets by you. But," he says, "you can't have any physical contact with the other people, but just don't let anybody get by." And I said, "Well, what does that mean? What if they push me or they shove me?" He said, "Well, whatever they do, just continue to try to block them from going through, but don't respond to anything that they might do to you." And I said, "Wow, okay." So I'm sitting there, and I'm a pretty good sized guy. I'm 6'1" or so, and 230 pounds. So I'm not a small guy. So I'm big. Maybe that's the reason they chose me, that I would be big enough that I would be able to kind of block that location, and that I was intimidating enough by my size that no one would challenge me. Well, so that's what occurred. So I sat there, or stood there, I should say, and I did have 2 or 3 people try to come through. I just told them, "Hey," I said, "no disrespect to you or whatever, but," I said, "there's no way you can come through here today. We have shut down the clinic and no one's getting by me, so that's it." And I said it that way, but I didn't do it in a threatening way. And so the people would turn around and leave. So the day progressed, and our group continued to kind of dwindle down a little bit. And the next thing you know, we're down to about 65 or 70 people. And I see these 3 women. I would call them witches, and I don't mean that they were bad people, but they themselves were almost self-proclaimed witches, because what they were doing was they were casting spells on the people, and they were doing these incantations, and they were all kind of like dressed kind of weird, and They're had this strange makeup on, and the next thing you know, and again, keep in mind that we were instructed that whatever physical thing would happen, that we had to just let it happen and not respond in any way. My job was to keep that one side secure and keep. There were other people that were in the up in the top, so to speak, up where the witches were, who were trying to keep people from doing anything. And then there were people on the right side, or another person on the right side, to keep that side completely safe from anybody trying to enter. So the witches started out with their incantations or their whatever they were doing, and casting the spells or whatever. But then they started getting physical, and they started. For whatever reason, there were some priests and nuns there, and they were targeted by these people. They were punching them, they were kicking them, spitting on them, slapping them, calling them names, and of course we all sat there, and I could not leave my post to do anything, even though I would have liked to, but at the same time, there was nothing I could do other than put my body between the priest or the nun and these three women. So they kind of like, after they had their fun or whatever they were doing, they meandered away and I didn't see them again. The next thing I know, realizing that we're down to about 40 people now, and I don't see any other marshals. They would call me a marshal. That was my title, and so I didn't see any other marshals. And all of a sudden, I saw this young man. He was probably about 6'3", 6'4", and he looked like he just got off the football field. He was built and good-looking kid, by the way, but he was very angry. He had a hold of this girl by the wrist, and he was literally dragging her down the hill. Not physically dragging her, but she was being led. And he was angry, and he apparently had gotten her pregnant and decided that he wanted to get an abortion, and he wasn't going to let these people that I was a part of have anything to do with blocking the clinic. That girl needed the abortion today, and he was going to make sure she got it. And he was coming down the hill, and I'm looking. There was no one else there. None of the other marshals. I guess they had gone over the other side to be arrested. And all of a sudden, I'm the only marshal there, and I had to decide, am I going to respond here and do what I'm supposed to be doing, is to blocking anyone trying to get through? Do I leave my post? I'm thinking, well, I could make that an excuse, but the reality was that I knew that I had to be the one to step up and put myself between him and the rest of these other 40 people that were sitting there helpless. And so I did. I walked over and I intercepted him just as he was coming to the crowd. Everyone was sitting down, by the way, at this point. And I said, sir, I'm sorry you can't come through here today because there's a political demonstration going on here. And I said, the clinic is closed. There's no way to get in the clinic. There's no way, you can't get through the group of people. And I'd appreciate it if you have to come another day, or you just have to turn around and not come here again. I hope you'll never come back to this place. And he said, get out of my way. I'm going to knock you on your ass. Pardon my language. But that's exactly what he told me. And I said, sir, I said, I'm sorry. I really can't get out of your way. I have to stand here and make sure you don't get through. Now, at this point in my life, I'm probably 50 years old, so I'm not exactly a young person, but I'm also not a small person. But I knew that this person meant business. I've been in enough fights when I was younger. I knew that when somebody meant business, that they weren't going to let anything. It wasn't a bluffing thing. He just looked at me. He said, if you don't get out of my way, I'm going to knock you down. And I said, sir, I'm sorry. You're just probably going to have to do that because there's no way I'm going to be able to let you go by me today. And so I had to stand there with my hands at my hips. And just about the time I could see his fist clenching up, and I knew he was going to hit me. And I'm standing there and I'm waiting for him to hit me. and I saw him start to raise his arm, and I'm looking at him, and I'm glancing at his arm, and I'm figuring, here it comes, I'm going down, and I'm standing there waiting for him to hit me. I don't know how in the world I had the courage to do it, but I just had to stand there. I knew I had to stand there. I didn't want to discredit God in the case. And all of a sudden, he's trying to raise his hand to hit me. And he could not get his hand more than about 6 inches up. And I could see the muscles straining in his arm to raise his hand to hit me. And he could not raise his hand. And he's at this point, he's like jerking towards trying to pull his hand up to hit me. And his fist is clenched, his knuckles are white, and I know he's going to get his arm up sooner or later and just pummel me. But all of a sudden, the other part of the story I forgot to tell you was the witches reappeared. And they were behind him screaming and making these horrible scream noises that I've never heard before. And they're saying, hit him, hit him, hit him. And he's pulling on his arm, trying to get it up to hit me. And then finally, in frustration, I don't know what happened. I don't know whether he just gave up or what. He spun around, and when he did, all 3 of the witches went flying. And they were like all sitting on their rear ends in the grass. And he took the girl and grabbed her by the hand, and up the hill he went. And I tell you this story, and it's a true story, and I can tell you the reason why I have no problem with some of the stories that I tell are so unreal that I wondered myself if anybody would believe them. There were 40 people that saw what happened that day. They sat there in disbelief because they knew this guy was going to just crunch me, and he couldn't raise his arm to hit me. And I believe to this day that the Holy Spirit held his arm down and said, you are not going to hit this man. And it was not because he didn't want to. Believe me, he was physically restrained. I don't know how God did it. All I know is he did it. And I did not get punched that day. Well, as the afternoon went on that day, there was another part of the question. Do you have what it takes when you're called? And that is exactly what happened that day. And I had to be arrested. And sure enough, I was. And it turns out that one of the ladies that happened to be arrested at the same time became a very good friend of mine. And we used to laugh about it when we would be involved with different church meetings or things that we were involved in over the years. And we would joke around about how we met when we were in jail together. And because of what they did basically was they took all of the people that were arrested and they put us in a kind of a holding area in like a underground parking lot. So we never really got into the jail, although they threatened to put us in the jail. That particular day, they didn't put anybody in the jail areas. They kept us in an isolated area, and then finally we went through a process of being processed to make sure that we weren't wanted for something, and then they released us, and we all piled back on the bus and went back to the church. Well, the question is, what do you do when you're called? And it doesn't matter. It may be that, might be God that's calling you to do something. And then again, it may just simply be something in your own life that takes that courageous step of doing what you know is right to defend the defenseless, as some people call it, to find the courage to stand up for what you know is right. Whether it's God calling you or just the fact that you know the difference between right and wrong. Well, I will tell you that if you're a Christian and you have the Holy Spirit, your guide, your protector, your comforter, your teacher, all the things that God promises the Holy Spirit will do for you, it makes life a whole lot easier. If you have to do that on your own courage and you do it without any conviction from God, Sometimes you won't find what you need to do the right thing, but other times maybe you will. I don't know. That's something between you and yourself, I guess. But if you want that assurance, the one way you can have it is to have that relationship with Jesus Christ. Well, I'm asking you this day the most important question that anyone will ever ask you. Do you know him?